Great is your faithfulness, O God. You wrestle with the sinner's restless heart. You lead us by still waters into mercy, and nothing can keep us apart. So remember your people, remember your children, remember your promise, oh God. Your grace is enough, your grace is enough, your grace is enough for me. Your grace is enough, your grace is enough, your grace is enough for me. Great is your love and justice, God of Jacob. You use the weak to lead the strong. You lead us by the song of your salvation, and all your people sing along. So remember your people, remember your children, remember your promise, oh God. Your grace is enough, your grace is enough, your grace is enough for me. Your grace is enough, your grace is enough, your grace is enough for me. Your grace is enough, heaven reaches out to us. Your grace is enough for me. And God, I sing your grace is enough. I'm covered in your love. Your grace is enough for me.
For this is what the sovereign Lord says: I myself will search for my sheep and look after them. As a shepherd looks after his scattered flock when he is with them, so will I look after my sheep. I will rescue them from all the places where they were scattered on a day of clouds and darkness. I will bring them out from the nations and gather them from the countries, and I will bring them into their own land. I will pasture them on the mountains of Israel, in the ravines and all the settlements in the land. I will tend them in a good pasture, and the mountain heights of Israel will be their grazing land. There they will lie down in good grazing land, and there they will feed in a rich pasture on the mountains of Israel. I myself will tend my sheep and have them lie down, declares the sovereign Lord. I will search for the lost and bring back the strays. I will bind up the injured and strengthen the weak, but the sleek and the strong I will destroy. I will shepherd the flock with justice. As for you, my flock, this is what the sovereign Lord says: I will judge between one sheep and another, and between rams and goats. Is it not enough for you to feed on the good pasture? Must you also trample the rest of your pasture with your feet? Is it not enough for you to drink clear water? Must you also muddy the rest with your feet? Must my flock feed on what you have trampled, and drink from what you have muddied with your feet? Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says to them: See, I myself will judge between the fat sheep and the lean sheep.
Well, to say that 2020 has been a bad year is an understatement. It has been one set of problems and issues on top of others, and it was just a huge dog pile of issues. Not only do we have COVID-19, but we have had a very toxic election cycle. We have had so many instances of racial injustice and violence against people of color. And this time has been a real revelation. It's been an uncovering of so many problems all at once. And it feels overwhelming. And these problems, while they're fresh for some of us, others are saying, yes, this has been our existence for our entire life. And we hear these readings from Ezekiel 34, and we realize that these issues are really not new to us or to our country. But it's been a perennial problem for humanity for as long as we've had recorded history. Injustice of one group of people against another, the rich and the powerful taking advantage of those who are more vulnerable. These are all issues that have been ongoing. And the prophet Ezekiel is speaking to the people about the ways in which they are treating one another, and really pointed statements against those people in leadership. Sharp critiques against the kings of Israel and Judah, sharp critiques against the Babylonian Empire and the people who came in and terrorized the people and removed them from their homes and scattered them. Many were brought into Babylon to be servants. Everything that they knew was taken away, even their names. They were given new names to be another way in which they were controlled and rebranded for the purpose of the Babylonian powers that be. So Ezekiel is speaking a combination of a word of hope for those who are trampled and oppressed, and a word of challenge for those who are doing the oppressing. God says that the people have been scattered, and so God's self is going to go and bring the people back together, to return them to their homes, to bring them to a land where the waters are still, the valleys are green. Very much a reminder of what we hear in Psalm 23. Being led beside still waters, to lay down in green pastures, and God providing for the needs of the people. But in those words of comfort, there's also that sense that God is fed up with the ways in which the people with power and leadership have not done their job to protect the people. Sharp words against the kings, sharp words against the religious leaders who let all this happen, who in fact were participating in a system that oppressed people financially and in so many other ways. The rich were getting richer, the poor were getting poorer, and life was becoming more and more difficult. And then to top it off, Babylon comes in and just tears everything up, scatters the people far and wide, subjugates them, and for those that remained in their homeland, it didn't feel like home. There was nothing really left that looked or felt like their home. So God said, if you're not going to do it, I'm going to do it. I'm going to find my people. I'm going to bring them back. I'm going to provide for them because you didn't. In our days that we have experienced most recently, these sorts of attitudes have also been seen in very powerful ways. How the rich have gotten richer, benefiting off of people in a time of crisis. How those in power have been trying to grab even more, disenfranchising voters. setting a stage that is trying to take what little power people have so that the people in power can amass it for themselves. And God's voice is still speaking today, in the midst of all that's going on, saying, I'm fed up with this. You all have been abusing one another. You've been trampling one another. You've been taking the resources for yourself and not giving them to the people that need it. You've been fouling up the water system. You've been terrorizing your neighbor. And so I will do something about it. Here we are in November of 2020, and we're waiting to see how that's going to play out. We know that it involves us, though, because as God's people, we are called to be a part of the system of justice, to make things right, to readjust things in life so that those who are most vulnerable receive the most care, and that we speak to the powers and the principalities to call into question the amassing of wealth and of power that are robbing it of other people, not caring for the needs of all. God is calling forth God's people, saying that there is hope, but that hope is participatory, that we need to be looking for the ways in which we care for one another, the ways in which we live out what would later become the gospel of Jesus Christ, to love our neighbors as Christ has loved us, to do those acts of ministry that we have seen Jesus do, to speak to the powerful those harsh words of truth, to run to the people who are most vulnerable and in need of care, and not being afraid to touch them. How do we see these sorts of things being enacted in the world around us? The Black Lives Matter movement has been a huge and powerful voice in these days, not letting us forget the plight of the people who are most vulnerable, who've been victimized by law enforcement, who have been victimized by the powers of white supremacy. We have seen them work for voting rights and trying to secure the safe ability to vote for all of the people. In Brazil, we've also seen a powerful movement form called the Landless Workers Movement. It's inspired and driven by this sense of biblical jubilee, that 49-year cycle where all debts are released and land goes back to their original holders, that everyone has a chance for the reset button to be hit. Because in Brazil, 3% of the population owns 2/3 of the land that is farmable. And so the Landless Workers Movement is 1.5 million people, roughly, across 23 of 26 states in Brazil. And they are working for access to the land for the poor workers through land reform. And one of the things that they're doing is looking at their constitution, looking at all of the details of it, so that they can turn that around and say, see, even in our constitution, it says that the land should fulfill a social function. So they are looking at how to bring land ownership to more people, to deal with issues of unequal income, of unequal distribution, of racism, sexism, and media monopolies. A lot of the same things that are happening here. It's a powerful movement, and it's an example of what the message of Jubilee can mean for our 21st century. How are ways that we're being called to do these very things? Part of it is to go to the streets, to join protests against the powers that abuse. It means contacting our elected officials and saying, hey, these are some changes that I think are important, that are vital for the future of our people. And with the change of administration that we see coming, I'm recording this on Thursday and things are looking like there will be a change of administration. We have a responsibility to speak to those people who have been elected to say, here are things that have to happen. We're stepping into the shoes that Jesus walked in when he was on earth, following the example of God who says, I myself will search for my sheep and will seek them out. There are so many ways that we can help to encourage one another, to provide for one another, to care for one another. So, what are some ways that you're able to do that? What is your giftedness? What is the passion that God's Spirit has put upon your heart to make a difference in the world, to help bring about this realization of God's provision for God's people? Like Ezekiel was speaking to all of the people, a word of hope for those who are oppressed, a word of challenge for those who are in power. What are ways that we can use our voices in real, hopeful, and prophetic ways? I hope that you'll share those things with us. Put those in the comments on our Facebook page or on our YouTube page, and maybe it will encourage someone else to be able to find a new way of getting involved and living into this great news that comes from God. Amen. In days filled with uncertainty, we hold fast to the truths that ground us. We keep our hearts set upon all that is just, all that is freeing, all that deepens our connections and commitments to one another. If we choose to follow, love will lead us. May this be our prayer and our practice today, this week, and all our days. Amen.